Welcome to meeting number 37 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members are attending in person in the room, as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to take a few moments for providing some explanations for witnesses and members. First, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. In accordance with our routine motion, I'd like to inform members of the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of our meeting. Now, pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, May 18th, 2022, the committee will commence consideration of Bill S-223, an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Concerning the drafting of amendments, I'd like to remind members to contact Alexandra Shura, the Legislative Counsel. Should there be any amendments to the draft, it is should there be anything that they would like to bring to her attention and ask for her guidance. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome our two witnesses on this specific bill. First, we have the Honourable Salma Atolajan, Senator, as well as Mr. Garnet Jennis, who's well known to you all, the MP for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. So you will each be provided 5 minutes, after which we will proceed with questions from the members. Senator, you have the floor. You have 5 minutes, and once you only have 30 seconds left, I'll put this up to provide you some context. But please do proceed. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, honourable members. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to appear before this committee as a witness as the sponsor of Bill S-223, an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, trafficking in human organs. Bill S-223 proposes to strengthen Canada's response to organ trafficking by creating additional criminal code offences in relation to such conduct and extends extraterritorial jurisdiction over the new offences. It also seeks to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to provide that a permanent resident or foreign national is inadmissible to Canada if the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration finds that they have engaged in trafficking of human organs. Currently, there are no laws in Canada banning Canadians from travelling abroad, purchasing organs for transplantation, and returning to Canada. That is shameful, especially when we have joined most of the world in condemning the sale of organs and transplant tourism. Over 100 countries, such as the United Kingdom, Norway, and Portugal, have passed legislation banning the trade of organs. Additionally, several countries have responded with legislation strengthening existing laws that ban organ trafficking and sales. There are a number of governmental and professional bodies with initiatives to regulate domestic and international organ transplantation and tackle organ trafficking, including, for example, the Council of European Convention Against Trafficking in Human Organs. In 2012, the World Health Organization claimed that an illegal organ was sold every hour. Overall, the number of illegal transplants worldwide is believed to be around 10,000 a year, and it is important to note that this is a conservative number, as many illegal organ sales remain unreported. Despite our inability to eradicate human rights violations around the world, we can enact change at home. It is entirely within our power to avoid complicity of transplant tourism within our own borders. Sadly, an illegal organ transplant is not a lifeline for Canadians needing a vital organ. Instead, the recipient can often suffer from surgical complications, infections, and poorer outcomes overall. These patients experience loss of the organ and death at higher rates than domestic organ transplant recipients. Despite the growing body of information on of information on the ramifications of transplant tourism, Canadians continue to travel abroad for commercial organ transplants. Doctors have reported that 3 to 5 people a year still arrive at St. Michael's Hospital having obtained a kidney in countries such as China, Pakistan, or India. St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver reports also seeing 3 to 5 returning organ tourists a year. A study on the clinical outcomes of patients treated at Ontario Transplant Centre after receiving organs through commercial transactions abroad found that most of the patients needed follow-up care on an urgent basis and some required lengthy hospital stays. This not only puts Canadian citizens at risk, but also contributes to burdening our already struggling healthcare system. To make matters worse, my entire allotted time could be spent on recounting story after story of victim organ donors, such as the missing 6-year-old boy who was found alone in a field crying with both of his eyes removed, presumably for their corneas. The young girl who was kidnapped and taken to another country for the sole purpose of harvesting her organs, as well as the terrified group of women and men who were found locked inside of an apartment, being held through deception and threats, waiting to be taken to a clinic to unwillingly have a kidney removed. As the prosecutor in the Kosovo case said, organ trafficking is, and here I quote, the exploitation of the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized in our society. The recipients of those organs are wealthy, influential citizens from foreign countries, largely Western countries, end of quote, who should be held criminally responsible. Trafficking in human organs is indeed a cruel harvest of the poor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. We now go to MP Jenis. MP Jenis, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, colleagues. I want to salute Senator Tulajan's incredible work on this bill. She's explained very well the provisions of the bill, and I won't repeat them. I wanted to speak more to the process and timing around this bill's life kind of over the last 15 years. This concept was originally proposed by a Liberal MP, Boris Yashnevsky, and a similar bill was tabled by Irwin Cotler. Neither of those bills were able to be brought for a vote. The process started in 2008, so almost 15 years ago. Senator Tulajan and I began working on this bill shortly after 2015. We were able to see a previous bill on organ harvesting and trafficking, S-240, pass the Senate, come to the House, come before the Foreign Affairs Committee. It was amended by the Foreign Affairs Committee, adopted and sent back to the Senate, but unfortunately, the Senate, before the Senate could consider the revised version, we went into an election. So efforts have continued since. Exactly the same bill, in the same way it had been amended by the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, was proposed and adopted by the Senate in the last Parliament. Again, it didn't make it through the process. This bill has now been adopted 3 times by the Senate, twice in its present form. It's been adopted previously by the House of Commons in its present form, and this form is exactly as it was amended by this committee in that Parliament. At the time, I was here at the committee, as was Boris Yashnevsky, who was the kind of the originator of this concept as legislation. So I'm normally the first person to say bills should be studied in detail. The fact is this bill has been studied extensively for 15 years. It's back before this committee in exactly the same form, and frankly, it's a no-brainer from a human rights perspective. We had good cross-party cooperation to get it up until this committee. The bill collapsed after only 1 hour of debate at second reading, and I was very grateful to be able to see that. Unfortunately, we're now only taking this bill up close to 6 months after it was referred to to the committee. And my view is that it is valuable for committees to prioritize legislation because although there's a range of important issues before any committee, legislation is where committees exercise their hard power. They can send recommendations as part of studies, but when it comes to legislation, that's where they exercise their hard lawmaking power. And I think we would all accept that if it was a government bill, there would be an expectation to prioritize it. So I very much wish we could have moved this bill forward earlier. Nonetheless, we are where we are. And currently, as this bill is scheduled, we would go to clause-by-clause consideration of it next Wednesday. Now, that is the last possible point before it would be automatically reported to the House anyways. So at this point, frankly, it is better for this bill if it is not considered at clause by clause and instead simply automatically reported. Because if it is considered at clause by clause and then reported to the House, then it has to go through report stage and third reading, whereas if we wait and simply allow it to be automatically reported on the 28th of November, then it goes straight to third reading and is able to move more quickly. I also think it would be very unfortunate if we had amendments adopted to this bill because it goes back through the Senate. And I don't want to have to wait another 15 years to pass a no-brainer piece of human rights legislation. This is the version as it was amended by the committee, amendments initiated by the government at the time. So I really hope we're able to get to that point of it being automatically reported. If we were undertaking study of this bill months ago, then there would be time to do clause by clause and maybe even time for amendments. But there just isn't time at this point, and so I'm very hopeful that that rather than seeing further delays, we will recognize the work that has already been done on this bill. We'll recognize the fact that this bill is in the form it was amended by the government the last time it was before the House. How many times it's passed the House and the Senate. Every time it's been up for a vote, it's unanimous, and so I'm hopeful that we would simply absorb and recognize the work that's been done and allow this bill to be automatically reported to the House so that it can go to third reading and proceed to finally, after 15 years, it become law. I think that's the least we owe to the many victims of this horrific practice around the world. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. MP Genis, your timing was perfect. It was exactly 5 minutes. So now we will open it to questions by the members. Mr. Hoback, you are first, and you'll be happy to know you have 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Chair?
Yes, that's
okay.
right.
So does that mean I get 7 minutes or 9 minutes? Because I'm
no 6
you sure
minutes.
it's not 6 or 9 minutes? Yeah, I am eating up my time. I would like to welcome Mr. McKay here too. I think that's great to see you here. Mr. McKay has a lot of my respect. I know his work in the U.S. has been very, very honorable, and I look forward to working with him down in the U.S. going forward for sure, because you do great work. Senator, I have one question. Like Mr. Genius has said, we've studied this bill. It's been sitting in front of us for numerous times, numerous occasions. You know this file inside out, and I think everybody in this room would recognize your strength on these types of issues. So is there anything that you see in this piece of legislation that should be added or amended or changed, or is it good enough the way it is, and is what should be the priority?
Thank you for that question. This is the bill that was sent to us that this committee and the House approved. And I've tabled it, I think 4 times, and I tabled it the first day we were back, and we didn't even take it back to committee because we already looked at it in the committee, and the senators are all satisfied, the senators on every side, unanimous consent that this is a good bill and we need to pass this. We accepted the changes that you made. So basically, this is what you sent us, and we brought it back to you. We accepted your changes, and I can't think of anything that we could add to it.
Thank you to the Senate for doing the work that you've done. And
Thank you.
I think, like Mr. Genius has said, this has been talked about. I think it's time to move forward. So I don't know if there's any value in talking about this issue anymore. I think it's actually, like Mr. Genius has said, let's just get it out of the committee and get it voted upon, and let's get it into legislation. I think that's the goal here. So in light of that, Chair, our committee has quite a few things that aren't finished. It seems like we have different reports. We have some motions that haven't been read. So I suggest that maybe we continue. And basically what I would suggest we do is that we resume debate that the debate be resumed on the motion that Garnet Genius moved on Monday, November 14th, and that a vote on the motion take place by the end of this meeting. Let's try to finish that debate and get it done today, and then we can continue checking that box and getting things done before Christmas. So I move that we move to that work.
Surely you recognize that that particular issue is not relevant to the issue that is before us today, and this was agreed well in advance. But is it? Okay.
Anybody else objecting to that? I think they all are very comfortable with what we've seen already as far as for the witnesses and their testimony.
We haven't had any chance to debate this. This is not the same Foreign Affairs Committee. This is a new committee. It's a new Parliament, and we have absolutely the responsibility to ask the witnesses who've come here, both in this panel and the next panel, and perhaps future panels, questions about this bill. We are not the same Parliament. We are not the Senate. We're the House of Commons, and we're a different Parliament, elected with a different mandate than in the previous Parliament. So I would actually strenuously object to say we fast-track anything on the basis that something was done somewhere else. It could have been done in another country, for all that matter. We're this Parliament, in this time, at this place, with this committee, with the new membership. I have never been on a committee in this House that has debated this bill. My first time. And so I would like the opportunity to get into it, as I think many members of the committee would like to.
Mr. Angus, you are next, sir.
Thank you, Chair. It's our duty as lawmakers to actually study laws that are being implemented. I appreciate the member for Sherwood Park is eager on this. For him to tell me that it's a great bill, other people looked at it, just pass it. And we're talking about a very serious issue. So either this issue is a serious issue or it's inconsequential. If it's inconsequential, then sure, let's debate whatever the Conservatives want to talk about. If it is as serious as we've been told, then questions need to be asked. Questions need to be asked about this bill, about how it's going to be implemented, about who it's going to impact, whether or not it will do the job that we've been told it's going to do. I have no reason to believe right now that we can simply rubber stamp something based on something that another parliament did at another time with other people. I'm here to represent the people of my region, to represent my party, and to make sure as a parliamentarian, I actually do the work that people expect of me, because we're talking about changing laws. So I would strenuously oppose shutting down debate on this and say we need to finish this. If the member takes this bill seriously, he would obviously want us to look at this. So I take it seriously. I've taken the time to be here. I'm ready to ask questions, so I'd say let's continue.
I wasn't sure it was a motion. I wasn't quite sure what the member said. If it was a motion, I think it was dilatory. I think it's not debatable. But I don't know whether he was making a suggestion or a motion. So you're making a motion, which I think is not debatable, but I would need the chair's. There's a condition in it. Could I have it reread then?
Motion Garnagini's moved on Monday, November 14, and that a vote on the motion take place by the end of this meeting. Again, the goal is to try to finish this. And I want to make sure that people understand we're not shortchanging any of the work that the Senator has done and the Senate has done and the House has done before them and Parliaments before them. There's been a lot of work done in this file. I think there's an expectation, though, by Canadians that we actually move on and actually get this file onto the legislative agenda and back into the House. So there is items that are crucial, and then the Gazprom issue is a crucial issue at this point in time. We've been talking about it for a while. We need to have a message sent to the Ukrainians that we're there to support them. And, why wouldn't we take the advantage of the time today? I think we're all in agreement in regards to the Senator and her comments and that legislation moving forward. So why wouldn't we just get to work on doing some stuff that we know also has to be done? Why don't we try to complete some things for a change instead of leaving things hanging in the air?
We next go to Mr. Epp.
Yes, Mr. Chair, my understanding of process is we do have a motion on the floor on Gazprom. So if we're talking about anything, with all due respect to the motion or the bill that's been studied and studied and studied, should our discussion not revolve around the importance of the Gazprom motion? That's what's on the floor.
The motion that Mr. Hoback made refers to a motion that I don't know what we're talking about. So I need to know what motion he is actually asking for us to resume debate on, because Mr. Garnett-Genis makes motions on many things, on many days, that are unrelated to the topic of the day. So I can't even look at the topic of the day to know whether or not the motion was what it was about. So what was the motion?
Motion that was debated on November 14 is that the committee report to the House that it calls on the Government of Canada to immediately revoke the waiver to Russian sanctions granted for the export of Gazprom turbines.
So point of order, that means we have a motion on the floor to resume debate on that, which I don't understand the condition that's been attached to it. So are we debating the motion to return? That's now been ruled that we can actually debate that motion to resume that debate? Is that where we're at?
Those are two separate issues that you subsequently brought up. It actually, he is now asking for a debate on this motion to go back to what we were debating last time.
Okay. For me to understand this, then, I guess we're into debate now. I would need to understand the logic of saying that this is an important piece of legislation, but he wants to stop debate on it. We have no vote on it, and resume debate on something else that we've dealt with that actually has no impact because there's a turbine sitting not being used anywhere. So it is not an urgent debate to get the turbine going. So I am really missing something, and it may be jet lag because I've been traveling, but I am simply not understanding. This would suspend debate on this whole bill that we're dealing with.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order.
Point
Who's
of-
recognized right now, Mr. Chair?
Point of order.
Now, the clerk is telling me, because there was a condition in the motion that we were putting up for debate, this is not actually allowed. You could have had the opportunity and the prerogative to actually bring a dilatory motion, but not one that has a condition. Nope, because it has a condition.
Okay, so then I'd have to change the motion to something that would be dilatory in nature? Okay. Then my motion would be changed to,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but I had a point of order prior
Yes,
to
I'm
this intervention.
yes.
I have the floor. I have the floor.
It's a point, yes, of course it is, yes.
Then I make the motion that the committee proceed to
There's a-
consideration.
No, there's a point of order. Mr.
No.
Hoback, there's a point of
There was a
order.
point of order and my hand was up.
There is
Mr.
a point
Horvath,
of
you have to
order.
wait.
Yes, Ms. Ben-Diane.
And then my hand was up, then he gets the floor.
Mr. Chair, at the time
Point of order takes precedence.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Ms. Ben-Diane, please proceed.
At the time of my point of order, which is a few minutes ago now, Mr. Chair, the witness that was before us to testify on the matter had joined the ranks of the Conservative members of the committee, which I do believe is not only inappropriate but contrary to the rules.
Yes, that is a behavior I've never seen before myself, but allow me to check with the clerk. Well, he can't, like, as a witness, he can't just leave your thing and go and sit with your...
The witness had sat down in a member's chair of the committee, which I understand is contrary to the rules. The witness is not a member for the time that he has testified. Mr. Genis.
Well, he didn't speak, so let's just allow everything else to proceed.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Zuberi.
I believe
Yes,
Mr. Angus had a point of order.
Then I'll.
yes,
take my
Mr.
turn
Angus
after
had
him.
one first. Yes, Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus? I don't think he can hear us.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. My concern is if we suspend debate on this, that the Conservatives are asking us to just pass this piece of legislation, which would change laws that would have criminal intent based on the fact that Mr. Jennis says it's a good bill. I don't see how we can go to clause by clause if we haven't finished our work on this. So are they willing to suspend clause by clause to get to this motion? Because if they're not, I am in no position to go to clause by clause based on the fact that I haven't even been able to ask questions of the witness who brought the bill. So if I just want clarification from them, are they saying we're going to suspend this legislation because they have other things they'd rather talk about, which I understand. They're conservatives. They can talk about whatever they want. But if this legislation is so important, if I can't do due diligence, I am not willing to say that I'm willing to suspend questions and then at the next meeting we would move to clause by clause. That would be a ridiculous undermining of our work as parliamentarians. So are they suspending the legislation and putting it to the side for some future date in order to debate the motion that they have? That has to be clarified now, because if we are not going to finish this bill, it cannot be brought forward for clause by clause, because unless we vote on whether or not we're ready to send it to clause by clause, because at this point, we have not had a chance to ask the questions or to say we're ready to go to clause by clause. So I'm asking the Conservatives, is this motion that they're going to bring going to supersede and erase the work that's been done on this bill? And this bill will be set aside to a future date when we can then vote whether or not we accept the bill and are ready to go to clause by clause.
We
On
next
that
have
point of order, not a
Mr.
new point.
Zuberi.
But is that a new point of order or on this point of order? I think if you raise a point of order, you're allowed to debate that point of order.
Okay,
Is
absolutely.
that not correct? I think if a point of order
Mr.
has been
Oliphant,
raised,
please.
you're allowed to comment on that before the new points of order are brought up. I think. Which I would say, I think what Mr. Angus is pointing to is exactly what the Conservatives are trying to do. They're trying to suspend debate on this to allow it the time to elapse where it is deemed reported to the House and would then go for third reading without consideration by the committee, truly. Which is odd when you've got an agenda which has got hours dedicated to both witnesses, where we have had an agreement on a calendar, where we would take witnesses, and we would have clause by clause to finish our work on time before it goes back to the House reported as deemed accepted. So I think, and Mr. Angus may want to comment on that, on his point of order, but I think that's what they're doing, to just suspend the whole democratic process, push it back to the House.
Yes, but that seems like it's more debate than point of order, Mr. Oliphant. We now go to Mr. Zuberi. Yes. Mr. Obeck.
Just want to clarify, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. We're actually saying that it's best interest of Canadians, it's best interest of the people that are impacted by not having legislation in place to get this through.
No order either, Mr.
But
Hoback.
Mr. Angus had asked for a Conservative member to explain to him what was going on. I just want to do that, if you'll let me, Chair. If not, then I'm sorry, Mr. Angus, the Chair won't let me. But if you will, just give me a minute and I will try to explain to it.
But we just interrupted someone's point of order as well.
Yeah, but I'm related to what Mr. Angus had said. Okay? That's why I'm doing it now.
Okay.
So it's in the stream. Okay. So, Mr. Angus, the idea is to get this into legislation as quickly as possible. And if this was a new bill that hadn't been properly studied in previous parliaments or in the Senate or any other location, in fact, if it had been severely debated in the House, or there was concerns in it in the House before it went to the Senate, then I'd probably be agreeing with you 100%, saying, you know what, you're right, we need to take a step back, we need to do clause by clause, we need to make sure we properly vet this. But this is a unique situation. This bill has actually been taken to task over and over and over again, and due to situations beyond its control, it has never gotten to the point for legislation, even though every party agrees with it. Every party has had input into it. There's been no amendments other than what the House wanted to see in amendments when it was originally brought forward. The Senate approved all those amendments. So it has gone through a very strong vetting process. And I do recognize the fact that you're new to the committee in regards to this file. So it'd be new to you, it'd be new to a lot of people. But in the same breath, we've seen it in the House before. You've probably even debated it in the House before, and you've probably debated in favor of it before. So we're trying to get it into the House as quickly as possible to get the legislation passed as quickly as possible. And in light of the fact that the committee didn't give it the time at the start of the time clock, if they would have said, okay, this is a priority, and we're going to actually deal with it, 3 weeks ago, so we could actually have spent a little more time getting a lot more witnesses. But the reality is we're at the end of the time clock, and now we're trying to ram it through. And we're not going to be able to do anything except possibly delay it or make it even worse and end up in a situation where we will not get this legislation through in a justly timely manner, and it ends up in a minority parliament going into the next year and possibly doesn't pass. So the quickest path to get it back into parliament is to let it time out and then actually
This has nothing to
let
do
it
with the
come back into
motion in
House.
front of us. This mini speech here has nothing to do with the motion in front of us. We are debating a motion that Mr. Hoback brought in front of us. This is... I am now speaking to
I'm
my
being
point of
honest
order,
with
which
them,
I've not been able to get to, and you have admitted that you are subverting the democratic right of members to be questioning the witnesses here.
Sure.
Just
Who has the floor?
I do.
Sure, who
because
has the floor? No, you don't. I haven't ceded the floor to anybody yet. You have no right to take the mic. In fact, your mic should be
You've
turned
just
off.
admitted that you
No, I
want
did
to
not.
fast track this
You-
to stop
I
any
don't know why
form
your
of
mic's
debate
even on,
or
'cause you've never been
conversation or
in-
questioning of the witnesses
You haven't
that
even
just
been
arrived here. Not more
acknowledged
than
as having the floor. So I don't even know why your mic's
Is there
on.
order? Do we have order in this meeting?
No, we
Do
don't,
have
Ms.
order
Fry,
in
and
this
that's really
meeting?
frustrating because I'm just trying to work through here.
Have the floor
No,
right now.
I'm not.
When
You
did
do
you take
not
it away
have
from me?
the floor right now. You have not been recognized, Mr. Hoback.
You have not taken and recognized anybody else, so I still have the floor.
Yes,
until you
I
recognize
have
someone.
recognized
Who?
other people.
Mr.
I just
Chair.
recognized him for his point of order, Mr. Hoback.
Yes.
Thank you.
It supersedes
Hoback.
everything, a point of order.
So Mr. Hoback just admitted that he was trying to
No, I did not.
fast. Yes, you did. Look at the minutes that will emerge from this meeting. Now you've just admitted that you want to, after about 2 minutes of questioning of these witnesses, your own party, a conservative member of Senate here, you want to stop her from speaking to this piece of legislation that has been winding its way through this House for the last 15 years because you want to discuss a turbine issue that is not even being used right now. We've discussed this turbine issue at length. It's unbelievable and shocking. It's shocking. On one hand, you filibuster us, this committee, for weeks on end. And then on the other hand, you want to give us 2 minutes to discuss this issue.
We're getting into debate.
I am
So
okay.
My
My point of order. Sorry, I got lost because of all these weird points of orders that came about. But my point of order is that there was a motion in front of us that is to be debated, and it cannot be withdrawn. Now we are debating that motion that Mr. Hoback brought to us, which must be debated and cannot be withdrawn, despite the fact he would have liked to have presented it as a non-debatable motion. But the fact of the matter is we must debate this, so let's get into it.
Point of order on that?
Actually, before we get to your point of order, what I would like to say is, at the very, very start, I did say that this motion is inadmissible, in my opinion,
So I
because it's not relevant to what is before us today for consideration. So now the clerk says that you're absolutely right, that this is a motion that is inadmissible.
The motion, original one, but
The
I've added a
motion that
second
you-
motion to that
that
in
you-
light of your ruling.
I'm sorry?
I've added a second motion in light of your ruling. We're dealing with the second
Am
motion.
I allowed
It's
to
already
raise a
ruled.
point of
The
order,
first
Mr.
motion was
Chair?
not in order.
Clerk, could you speak on this?
I read it.
I'm
to
not
you.
sure, but if it's,
I'll read it again.
is it a substantive motion?
Yes, it is.
No, sorry. It's a
Well, you're not
dilatory motion.
allowed to do a substantive motion. That's the issue.
Dilatory, sorry.
Okay, well. Yes, Mr. Bergeron, point of order.
I asked to get my name on the speakers list, and it seems to me the way to intervene in the debate is to raise points of order. So may I intervene on a point of order, or is this only reserved to the other members of this committee? I have to admit that personally, I was expecting today that we continued the debate that we started at the previous committee, the debate on the turbines. Now, we started on something else, and that's fine with me. But will we have an opportunity to address our witnesses? Or are we going to continue to raise points of order one after the other and pretend that they are points of order when they're actually taking positions on what's going on? Because otherwise we're going to stick to points of order just to speak. So we have a speakers list. Let's stick to it, Mr. Chair.
I believe it is, because Mr. Bergeron has suggested that we should, on order, by standing orders, continue with the debate that we ended with on our last meeting. However, in my understanding, the meeting was adjourned. It was not suspended. Therefore, no, we don't continue with that debate. So this is truly a point of order, maybe my only one, but it truly is a point of order to suggest to the chair to rule on whether or not Mr. Bergeron is right. However, in my mind, the meeting was adjourned. Therefore, the agenda of today's meeting is as it was in the calendar approved by this committee, as opposed to the continuing of a debate. Je pense que c'est correct.
That is absolutely correct, Mr. Oliphant. The last meeting was adjourned, and all the members, no, I'm afraid you can't do a point of, Mr. Janice, you can't do a point of order when you're sitting there as a witness, as you're fully well aware. So, that being the case, Mr. Oliphant, you are absolutely correct, and the motion that you actually first did bring is inadmissible. But it doesn't matter because...
Sure it does. It's a different motion. The motion to proceed to the consideration of the motion of Garnet Genius moved on Monday, November 14th.
But Mr. Hoback, nobody actually heard your second motion, so...
I said it on the mic. It's probably in the blues. If you want to go check, go ahead.
No, I mean, no, if no one's heard it, you can't now change the rules and say, I did have another motion that no one has heard here, and say on that basis, we're allowed to actually... Mr. Janice, you have not been recognized to speak. You are a witness today. Well, it's not very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate your...
But it does come back to me, and I move that motion.
For questioning, we have time left.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, what is your motion, Mr. Hoback?
I move the motion that the committee proceed to consideration of the motion of Garnet's Geniuses moved on Monday, November 14th. And for Mr. Oliphant, that's the Gazprom motion.
Okay. Fine. So we go to a vote?
Yep.
Ms. Bendayan.
Mr. Chair, nay.
Dr. Fry.
Sorry, no.
Mr. Oliphant.
No.
Mr. Sarai.
Nope.
Mr. Zuberi.
No.
Mr. Abul Taif.
Yes.
Mr.
Could the motion be reread, please? It's to resume the debate on the motion proposed by Garnet Genius on November 14th.
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer.
Yes.
Mr. Aubac.
Yes.
Monsieur Bergeron.
Oui.
Mr. Angus.
No.
No.
Nays 6, yeas 5.
Thank you very much. So we will now resume with
How
our...
much time do I have, Chair?
I'm sorry?
How much time do I have left?
Not much.
I would say, yeah. You will have a minute, Mr. Hoback.
A minute?
Yes.
Not 7 minutes?
No.
No, thank you, Chair. And I indulge the committee. It's always good to have healthy debate. That's what makes our democracy so great that it is. Senator...
Got to follow the rules, though.
Exactly right, Ms. Fry, and that's what they're here to do, is to follow the rules, and I'm glad to do that. Win or lose, we follow the rules, and that's something that makes our democracy great. Senator, when we look at this piece of legislation, can you give a few examples of people that are impacted, like you did in your testimony, and how that impact reflects back into tourism coming out of Canada for harvesting of organs?
Well, what we have seen is that initially we were seeing that transplant tourism was taking place in Asia, But recently, with the migrant crisis, we're seeing that a lot of it is taking place in North Africa. And we heard in testimony where people who were trying to become refugees, trying to flee to Europe, and they would get to some point and they would be asked for extra money. And if they weren't given the money, there was a certain doctor who was doing that, who would come and he would harvest their organs. And this trade has started flourishing. There's a certain country, Egypt namely comes to mind, and this was an issue that I did raise with the Egyptians. There was a human rights person visiting from Egypt, and I raised this issue with her. I said, Egypt comes to mind, that there's an Egyptian doctor who goes in a helicopter, harvests the organs, and these organs are sold. So it's truly, truly preying on the vulnerable. And those people, sometimes people will sell their kidneys because they're poor, they have no other means of support, and in many cases, they will not even be paid.
What kind of conditions are these operations taking place in?
Terrible, terrible. And we heard of cases where, a lot of these people whose organs are taken do not survive because they're done in back rooms and alleys, and there's no, aftercare. Some of them are threatened. They're told they're being followed. And if they even tell anyone that their organ was harvested, they would be killed. They just left to their own devices. A lot of them don't even know they're kidnapped and their organ is harvested. They wake up and they realize they don't have a kidney. And it's been going on. And a lot of our allies have strengthened legislation, and we haven't. And the Senate of Canada, it's not a foreign country. We're just a few blocks down. This is the legislation that we looked at, and the senators on every side. We've got 4 different groups there, and everyone agreed. This is not a partisan bill. We heard this legislation was started by the Liberals 15 years ago, and we did have Kotler as a witness. And we looked at it, and the reason it didn't go before the committee, because all the Senate, the leadership of the Senate, they all sat and they said, this is something that we looked at, and this is something that we should have passed a long time ago. We accepted the changes that you made. We're sending you the bill that you sent to us. We did not change anything. I don't know what else to say. It's like I said, the harvest of the poor. And a lot of those people don't even get paid. Yeah. And a lot of them don't survive. So, this is, for me, this is not a partisan bill. It's about doing the right thing.
I agree with you, Senator, and I hope we'll see this committee get it through really quickly, and we'll get it to legislation fairly quickly. I think everybody around this room agrees with you. This needs to happen quite fast, so I think there's lots of goodwill around this table to see that happen, and I hope it will. Chair, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Zuberi. You have 6 minutes, Mr. Zuberi.
Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here from both the Senate and the Commons. And to underscore this is a nonpartisan bill, I'd like to also highlight that I was happy to second this when it was introduced into the House, to underscore how this is a nonpartisan issue. The issue of human rights is always nonpartisan. And I'm happy that we are actually able to fulsomely discuss and debate this important piece of legislation, which the government does support. And I would say any fair-minded person should support. And the job of this committee, and as committees in general, is to study the legislation at hand and then to suggest improvements, if there are any to be had, which is the exact normal process and appropriate process of each and every committee. I have happily worked with Mr. Jenis as on the issue of the Uyghur, and we both co-chair a friendship group on the Uyghur. And we have learned about organ harvesting, in relation to this specific deep and serious human rights issue, which we know that they are facing very serious human rights challenges that may rise to crimes against humanity, according to the UN High Commissioner, the past UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And also which many countries, including our parliamentarians, said mounted to genocide. In terms of We know that David Kilgore and David Mateus have also done extensive research work, both as experts and in this space on organ harvesting of Falun Gong, Falun Dafa practitioners, and that is well documented. I'm happy to hear, not happy I should say, but I know that this is an issue that migrates, as you said, has migrated not only from one region of the world, but to other regions of the world. I'd like to ask Mr. Jenis first. Why are we creating a second point of its inadmissibility for a criminal act when this is already in IRPA, the immigration? So why are we creating two elements of inadmissibility when this is already in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act there? Why are we duplicating it? Don't you think that this can lead to a wiggle room and ambiguity for defense lawyers, for example, to argue out of inadmissibility to Canada?
Thank you, Mr. Zuberi. That's a good question. It was a question that was raised previously when this bill was studied. So let me say 2 points on that. First of all, when it comes to what would the substantive distinction be between those provisions? Inadmissibility on the basis of criminality could not apply in a case where being involved in organ harvesting or trafficking was not actually deemed a criminal offense in the country where it was taking place. So sad reality is that in the People's Republic of China, there is forced organ harvesting happening that is coordinated by the state. So it would not be a violation of the law in China for an official to be involved in forced organ harvesting and trafficking.
Thank you. And I'll take back my time. But thank you for that. And I guess we'll ask that same question to other witnesses later on as they sit in the exact chair where you're sitting. In terms of Senator Atulajan, and I really appreciate you coming here and being patient with everything you've just seen from your own colleagues in your own party, if I have to be honest, who try to stifle this exact conversation and debate that we're having right now, which I find shocking and problematic. But that being said, I'd like to ask you, in terms of this is an important piece of legislation. It sends a very important signal. In terms of the threshold when it comes to prosecution and gathering of evidence, if these crimes are happening outside of Canada, how will we be able to gather the evidence in order to prosecute at the threshold of criminal law, which is beyond a reasonable doubt? Can you explain that, please?
Well, what we had put into this was that we wanted the doctors to report, like if somebody is shot and they go to a doctor, the doctor has to report that they had a patient come in who had a gunshot wound. And we had put that in, but it was taken out by this committee, if I'm correct. So
that was Senator Atulajan, but I'll allow you, Mr. Jenis.
Sure. Thank you for your generosity in allowing me back in. I had more to say on the previous response, but be that as it may, it was a government amendment to remove the mandatory reporting provisions because it was members of the government who said they didn't want those provisions in. So in an ideal world,
just to take back my time, I'm speaking specifically about evidentiary threshold to prosecute. So how do you, evidence gathering to prosecute. So we're dealing with crimes, potential crimes outside of Canada. We need to have the evidence to prosecute people for criminal standard. How do we do that? Ms. Atulajan,
sure.
Ms. Senator Atulajan.
Well, we had put the onus on the medical doctors, because if you have a patient who's on a transplant list and all of a sudden the patient is not on the transplant list, he takes his name off, something has happened. Or if you have someone who comes in who is having health issues and you see the patient has had a transplant, the authorities should be told. But that clause was taken off because it felt it was putting too much responsibility on the doctors. So, yeah.
Thank you, and my time is up.
Can I?
I'm sure that we'll dive more into this with other witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We next go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was wondering whether I'd have a chance at some point today, and I'm very pleased to partake in this exchange. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today to discuss this bill. First, I would like to discuss the procedural aspect raised by Mr. Genus. I must say that I'm very sensitive to the argument he raised that already 10 years ago, to 15 years ago, this Parliament, not exactly this bill, but legislation aimed at prohibiting the traffic of organs. And what we've witnessed, and in regard to Xinjiang, it is clear that we cannot remain passive with regard to what's going on, and we have to take actions. But I do feel a certain discomfort when we assume that this legislation is at the exact same point as the previous legislation was, and that we should avoid the clause by clause under the pretext that this has been done previously. And therefore, I have discomfort with that. Moreover, given the assertion that it is 100% identical, there is no difference, and I don't think that's exact. And for instance, and this, it's our analysts, as have pointed out, in the summary of S224, it was seen that the immigration minister would have the power to prevent a foreigner to be involved, who was involved with traffic of organs, to come in. And under the previous and now it would be the responsibility of the minister responsible. So in S224, it would be the immigration minister, and now that power is being turned over to the minister responsible. So how can you do that and state that the two bills are the exact same? Thank you.
Excuse pour le delay. There's the translation catching up.
I hope the chair will take it in consideration in my time.
I hope so also. So let me answer your direct question, then if I can just comment on your preamble as well. My understanding of this bill is that there have been multiple versions of this bill at different points in time. There was an amendment to Bill S240. There were amendments to Bill S240 that passed this committee in 2 parliaments ago, and then it was sent to the Senate. My understanding is that this bill is identical to the version that passed the House of Commons committee. So there were previous versions, but it's identical to the version of the House of the bill that passed the House committee at that time. I agree with you, by the way, that it would have been very reasonable for the committee to look at this bill, hear from witnesses earlier on in the process. My point was just that we are way too late. The clause by clause next week is 3 sitting days before the automatic reporting deadline, which means that the committee has not left itself time. So if we were having this conversation even 2 or 3 months ago, and people had said, actually we want to hear from a few witnesses, and if we decide no amendments are needed, that's fine, but we want to hear from the witnesses. It's just that we're in a minority parliament. Anything can happen. This bill has sat before the committee for almost the full 60 sitting days. So do I think it's reasonable for committees in a new parliament to say we want to take a fresh look at this? Absolutely. Do I think it's reasonable to wait the full 60 days without talking about the bill and then say at that point, well, now we need to have a fulsome, detailed study? I don't really think that's reasonable, and I'm certainly not blaming you for that. I personally have expressed the view before this committee, before as members know, that we should prioritize legislation, not because it's my bill, but because legislation, as opposed to studies, is the way that committees exercise their hard power. But it is just too late. Like, doing clause by clause next week will only have the effect of delaying the bill. If we adopt it with amendments, it will significantly delay the bill. If we adopt it without amendments, it will still delay the bill because it will require report stage when otherwise there would be automatic reporting. So I'm sympathetic, but we are where we are.
I understand what you're telling us, Mr. Janis, but on the one hand, we have convened witnesses, and this was a common agreement. So it seems to me inappropriate to just thank them or not listen to our guest witness and release them. I'm uncomfortable with that. And there is no reason for us to assume that a clause by clause will give rise to amendments. Maybe yes.
Over the 6 minutes. Thank you.
Vous m'avez interrompu, monsieur?
Did you interrupt me, Mr. Chair?
We also want to hear the answer, Mr. Bergeron.
So,
Faut juste s'assurer que les autres aussi ont 6 minutes.
Mr. Bergeron, I think, like, originally when we had considered a prospective calendar for this month, it was that we would have clause by clause today. And if we had clause by clause today, that would have given us a little bit of extra time. But again, I don't think it's a reasonable practice for committees to wait till the last possible day before the automatic reporting deadline and then have clause by clause. It looks like a tactic to delay the bill, frankly, to say the last possible minute we're never going to have clause by clause.
As I said,
at that point, it should just
Mr. Janis, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off. We're well over. And I did warn you at the very, very start, you have 10 seconds to respond to that because we were over already. Thank you. So if we can now go to Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you for inviting me to your committee. Senator, I hope you would agree that one of the important things about having witness testimony is so that we can put on the record, so that people know why legislation is passed, why it is important. This is our job, is to ask these questions, not simply to rubber stamp. So whether or not someone else has looked at this, whether this has been around for a long time, I think it is a basic role. So I'll ask you a number of questions because I think it's important to get this important legislation clarified for the Canadian people, and I'm hoping we can have that conversation. So, Senator, under Section 279043 of the Criminal Code, the exploitation for purpose of trafficking in persons includes a removal of organ and tissue by means of deception, threats, force, or coercion. Section 279021 criminalizes the receiving of financial or other material benefit if it was derived directly or indirectly from trafficking of a person for the purpose of exploitation. Section 7411 of the Criminal Code sets out extraterritorial jurisdiction for these offenses. So how many cases have been prosecuted in Canada for organ trafficking?
I think any. Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Sorry, I didn't ask you, Mr.
Okay.
You're not a senator, not yet, so I'm asking the senator. Thank you.
Well,
when you're senator, I'll be more than happy to listen to you.
I don't think there's been any. I don't think there's been any cases from saying that. I don't think so. No. I agree with you. I should have had witnesses, and I wish the bill had been looked at earlier, so you could have had witnesses. I'm not a lawyer. What we looked at this bill was we saw and we heard when we traveled that we were asked that why doesn't Canada have laws against organ harvesting? So to my knowledge, and I might be wrong, I don't think there's been any cases prosecuted under this law.
So we haven't had any cases prosecuted. Now you mentioned that I think your number was 5 cases in Vancouver, 5 cases at St. Mike's. So were they reported to the police, or how did you become aware of those cases?
I would have to get back to you on that. I don't know if they were reported to the police, but what we heard was when we had testimony and we did research, that's what it showed, that there were a few cases. And St. Mike's said that they have cases, and the hospital in Vancouver said that they have cases that come through. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm
at this stage,
interested in
I
that.
don't know if the police was involved. I guess it's something that I could look at and get back to you. And I wish that there had been time for you to have, I've heard from the legal community and maybe heard from the police, and that this bill had been, if you want.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
This is one of the questions I'm asking is when we're adding to laws or bringing in new laws, are the existing laws not being utilized? So I think it's important for us to get a sense if we've had any prosecutions, if we've not had, why not? If there have been cases at St. Michael's Hospital or in Vancouver, why were those not reported to the police? Because I've noticed that this legislation is focused on refugees. Is there no legislation that would say ensure the doctors report, or would that have been a better avenue to make sure that we actually cut this practice down if people are coming back to Canada having engaged in illegal practices? Why are we focusing on the Refugee Act and giving it in the power of the minister as opposed to obligations to professionals to report and having that dealt as a police matter? Because this is really terrible, awful criminal activity. So, Senator, what do you think about that?
Thank you for that question, and I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why when we had the original bill, we did put in that, we did suggest that if the doctors see one of their patients who was on the list for an organ transplant, all of a sudden has taken his name off, they should be reporting it. If somebody comes in to the hospital who's obviously had an organ transplant, they should be reporting it. But, this committee, the House, decided they didn't want that. And I think it was important because, we were told there's too much responsibility on the doctors. But like I said when I spoke and gave my remarks initially, the doctors do report every time there's a victim, who's been shot, and they come to them for treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
For whatever reason, the House did not want that responsibility placed on the doctors. But the reason I feel that this is a starting point for us. We need to have some sort of legislation in place. We know that Canadians are going abroad for organ harvesting. When there was a raid in Kosovo and they caught people who had come to have organs transplantation, there was a Canadian there. So we know that Canadians are going abroad.
Do we have numbers on where Canadians are going, and have there been any prosecutions of Canadians going abroad? Because this is an international crime, and it's very important that and this is why I go back to that we have in the criminal code protections. In that Kosovo case or any other cases, has there been a Canadian prosecuted for going abroad to engage in such deplorable activity?
Like I said in my notes, currently there is no law that bars people from going abroad to get an organ. And I think it's happening in different parts of the world. Canadians are going. They're going to China, they're going to India, they're going to Pakistan, they're going to other countries to get organs.
But doesn't Section 7
I'm afraid, Mr. Angus, you're over time.
Jurisdiction of these offenses? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, at this point, given that we are well over the period that we had allotted for questions, I'm afraid that we're just going to have to keep it at one round of questioning because we now have to go to the witnesses. But on this point, allow me to thank you immeasurably, Senator. Allow me to thank MP Janice for having been here with us, having allowed us to develop a more sophisticated understanding of this very important bill. Very grateful indeed. Now, we will adjourn for a couple of minutes. Suspend, sorry. We will suspend for a couple of minutes. The two members that are online, if you could just remain, you don't have to do anything, but we just want to make sure we get the next witnesses connected. Thanks. By video conference today. Please wait until your name has been recognized before speaking. Click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. It is now my great pleasure to welcome three witnesses with us, all three of whom are here virtually. Our first witness is Dr. Miriam Cohen, who is the Associate Professor at the Faculty of Law, University of Montreal. We also have Dr. Lindsay McKay, Assistant Teaching Professor at the Faculty of Arts at Thompson Rivers University, as well as Dr. Jagbir Gill, who is with the Canadian Society of Transplantation and serves as Vice President. You will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks before we will proceed with questions from the members. So if I could ask Ms. Cohen, Dr. Cohen, to please proceed first. Yes, Mr. Bergeron.
Mr. Chair, I want to ensure that all of the tests have been done of the witnesses and that these were successful.
Our technical advisor here and to the clerk to confirm that that is the case.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you.
So we will now proceed with Dr. Cohen. Dr. Cohen, you have 5 minutes. And when you're approximately 30 seconds short of your 5 minutes, I will put this up just so you're fully aware that you should be wrapping up. Dr. Cohen, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, members of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development, it is an honor and a privilege to appear before you today as part of a panel of witnesses in view of the consideration of Bill S-223, an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, trafficking in human organs. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. I'm associate professor at the Faculty of Law at Université de Montréal, where I hold the Canada Research Chair on Human Rights and International Reparative Justice. My areas of teaching and research are international law, international criminal law, and human rights. I will focus my remarks today on legal questions and more precisely on international law frameworks relating to the trafficking in human organs. My opening statement will be in English, but I will be pleased to answer questions in both languages. As for the context, as noted by various international reports, the commercial trade in human organs has developed into a global concern. Human organ trafficking causes grave human rights violations. It involves often transnational criminal activities committed by an organized, complex network of criminal groups. Trafficking in human organs has become a highly profitable industry, and according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, organ trafficking remained among the most difficult crimes to detect. The trafficking of human organs often involves the trafficking of human beings for the purpose of harvesting their organs. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has recently deemed human trafficking for purpose of organ removal one of the fastest growing forms of human trafficking. The flagship 2020 Global Report on Trafficking in Persons indicated increasing reported cases of trafficking for purpose of organ removal. Very recently, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime launched the Toolkit on Investigation and Prosecution of Trafficking in Persons for Organ Removal. Turning to the international legal framework of trafficking in human organs, considering the global impact of trafficking in organs, there have been several initiatives under international law to combat organ trafficking. I'll briefly review the most relevant one. First, the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, supplementing the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, also known as the Palermo Protocol, 29 September 2003, entry into force. The trafficking in persons for the purpose of organ removal is clearly defined in the Palermo Protocol. Article 3A states that trafficking in persons shall mean recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons for the purpose of exploitation. Exploitation shall include at a minimum the exploitation of prostitution or others and other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. Canada ratified this protocol in May 2020, and it is the first binding instrument under international law which defines trafficking of human beings and includes trafficking in persons for the purpose of removing organs. Canada changed its laws after the ratification of the protocol, a point to which I'll refer later in my presentation. Adopted in 2008, the Declaration of Istanbul on Organ Trafficking and Transplant Tourism is not a legally binding instrument under international law, but it does, however, provide some guidelines to states concerning organ transplantation. In 2010, the Declaration of Istanbul Custodian Group was formed with the task of overseeing the dissemination of the declaration. The preamble of the declaration refers to exploitative practices that have harmed poor and powerless persons all around the world. The declaration has been endorsed by various national and international medical societies, including from within Canada. I turn to the World Health Organization's guiding principles on human cell, tissue, and organ transplantation, the WHO guiding principles. The WHO has expressed concern with the commercialization of organs and adopted 11 guiding principles concerning transplantation programs. They aim to provide orderly, ethical, and acceptable framework for the acquisition and transplantation of human organs. The guiding principles mention informed consent, prohibition of monetary payment. There have been also United Nations General Assembly resolutions that have referred to trafficking in organs. The UN Resolution 71 322, titled Strengthening and Promoting Effective Measures and International Cooperation on Organ Donation and Transplantation to Prevent and Combat Trafficking in Persons for the Purpose of an Organ Removal and Trafficking in Human Organs of 8 September 2017, urges member states to prevent and combat trafficking in persons for the purpose of organ removal. It further urges member states to consider adopting strengthening legislative frameworks, including by reviewing, developing, or amending them as appropriate to prevent and combat trafficking in persons for the purpose of organ removal, adopting appropriate legislative measures necessary to guarantee that the donation of organs is guided by clinical criteria and ethical forms. I will move on in the interest of time to the Council of Europe Convention Against Trafficking in Human Organs, entered into force on 1st of March 2018. It is the first international legally binding instrument that is specifically dedicated to trafficking in human organs. As of this date, it has received 14 ratifications. The treaty is open to Canada for ratification, which it has not yet occurred. The purposes of the convention are, per Article 1, prevent and combat the trafficking in human organs by providing for the criminalization of certain acts, to protect the rights of victims of the offenses established in accordance with this convention, to facilitate cooperation at national and international levels on action against trafficking in human organs. Within the legal framework in Canada, the Criminal Code criminalizes trafficking in persons and trafficking in persons for the purpose
Professor
of
Cohen,
organ
if I could
removal.
ask you to wrap it up. You are a minute and a half over your 5 minutes. So if you could wrap it up in the next 10 to 15 seconds, and then we will have the opportunity to ask you questions, and you can incorporate what you were about to say in your responses. Thank you.
Thank you. So the rest of my intervention today was to address specific points on the need to tackle organ trafficking specifically, in addition to the provisions that already exist on the criminal code concerning the trafficking in persons for the purpose of removal of organs. So I will stop now, but I will be glad to answer questions from the members of the committee. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen. We now go to Dr. McKay. You similarly have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for inviting me to appear. I am a sociologist. In brief, I support this bill. I think it's an important piece of potential law that we could pass in Canada to tackle this problem. I'm going to focus my remarks on my 2016 publication called Generating Ambivalence: Media Representations of Canadian Transplant Tourism. This is in an open access journal called Studies in Social Justice, and there's a link to it on page 6 of your legislative summary. In this research project, I sought to understand why there was not more public pressure to stop Canadian participation in the organ trade, despite a robust anti-transplant abuse movement. What I did is analyze mainstream Canadian media. I found that the media generates ambivalence towards the issue of transplant tourism. First, by absolving Canadians of responsibility, and secondly, by consistently orienting public attention away from knowing and thinking about health outcomes and human rights, especially for organ providers. The anti-transplant movement, a transplant abuse movement, has had to overcome that kind of mainstream public messaging we find in the mainstream media. So in my study, I included print and online newspaper, films, TV documentaries, books. The earliest one I found was in 1988, and this went to 2015. This is secondary research. The premise of the study is that the mainstream media shapes public attitudes and thus public policy. I used a post-colonial theoretical lens to analyze the data. My findings were that of finding 233 articles over this 27-year period, most from 2004 to 2009, the articles tended to be sensationalist. Then I did a deeper qualitative analysis of 74 articles, including 6 Canadian transplant tourists, and with mention of 2 brokers operating out of Canada. The pattern in the data set, based on mainstream media was one of gross imbalance. Organ transplant providers are invisible in these stories. The public learns very little to nothing about live organ sellers or potentially coerced deceased donors. We're not invited to stand in their shoes and think about their journey. When health outcomes and human rights are mentioned, this tended to be an isolated passage within a sentence with an overall narrative of sensationalism and oriented around the buyer. So transplant tourists are center stage in the narratives of what Canadians learn about this practice. We hear about them and read about them as heroes in a survival story narrative of a dangerous journey presented with empathy. Their actions are cast as morally wrong, but understandable, difficult, relatable, even rational and necessary. Buyers are compelled to take radical action. The public are invited to stand in those shoes and to gain that knowledge about what it's like to be that potential recipient and the challenges they face. Transplant tourists are presented in the mainstream media as innocent victims, compelled to travel and take risks, innocent because they were ignorant and didn't know, quote unquote, why or how the organ provider was able to give that organ. They're also sometimes presented with this narrative of reciprocity, that it's a fair exchange, as if an organ and money are commensurable objects. And buying an organ is presented also as understandable because of the narrative of organ scarcity. So transplant tourism is presented in mainstream media as a symptom of another problem, that Canada is to blame, and it's also the solution. We must solve the larger national organ scarcity problem, and then that would solve the transplant tourism problem. And thus, this is another way of constructing transplant tourists as victims of long wait lists. I argue, having studied this topic for 20 years, that there's no evidence that the shortage will ever end, and that this is a deflection from the concerns around human rights and health outcomes, especially for organ providers. So the mainstream media eclipses public discussion of whether and how to stop Canadians from buying organs in other countries. Imbalanced narratives generate one-sided knowledge, empathy, and absolve responsibility for health outcomes and human rights. That is the messaging that the transplant abuse movement has had to overcome. And one notable exception from that movement that does this very well is Rama Rao's 2010 independent film called The Market. Unlike every other mainstream media piece, in this story, a BC woman on dialysis traveled to India, and what's unique is that she actually met the kidney seller. She saw the radically unequal standard of living between them and life chances. And after getting to know the seller, she said no. She did not proceed with the transplant, and she returned home to dialysis. So the only challenge, though, is that the public does not have access generally to that film. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. McKay. We now go to Dr. Gill. Dr. Gill, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak with you today on this very important issue. As a point of clarification and disclosure, I am a transplant physician who works at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, and have got nearly 15 years of experience dealing with the ramifications of transplant tourism. I also sit as the Canadian representative and counselor with the Declaration of Istanbul Custodian Group that was mentioned earlier, which is an international organization whose mandate is to end organ trafficking. Today, I'm speaking in my capacity as a representative of the Canadian Societies of Transplantation, and I've also been asked to speak on behalf of the Canadian Society of Nephrology. So these are organizations that represent healthcare professionals in Canada in the field of organ transplantation as well as kidney disease. In the interest of time, I'll limit my comments today to a few key areas pertaining to the proposed bill. I'll make myself available for any further questions or even after this session if that's the will of the committee members. So firstly, I would like to highlight the status of this issue in Canada from the front lines perspective. The side of the practice that I'll focus on is what we encounter as transplant professionals in Canada, which is really the patients who return after having engaged in the presumed purchase of an organ. It goes without saying that the issues from the donor side that we've heard already today are abhorrent and are strongly and the transplant community strongly feels that these issues need to be addressed. Some key details I think that are worth sharing in terms of what happens that we see, typically patients that are engaging in this practice have indeed been waiting for a transplant for many years. The median wait time in Canada is about 5 years for a kidney transplant. And at some point, typically what we see, and this is anecdotal, is on the advice of someone within their social network, will say, why don't you look outside of Canada for options? And that then leads to this act. And I think a key issue that needs to be acknowledged is that there is almost always a broker involved. So the act of traveling overseas to purchase an organ is being coordinated by a third party where someone is financially profiting from this. It's also notable and I think important to reflect on the fact that when we've looked at demographics of who individuals are, and I've done a number of research studies on this issue myself, we've looked at the individuals who have engaged in this practice. We do see that it's often individuals from populations in whom there is documented reduced access to transplantation in Canada. And in terms of access to transplant, that does appear to be a driving factor in some of these cases. In terms of what happens when people come back to Canada, many require urgent or emergent care for infectious complications. To make matters more complicated for clinicians, we have very little, if any, documentation provided to us. We've had to guess whether the organ was purchased, what the donor was, situations were, what the matching was, and that really does compromise our ability to care for these individuals when they return. And so we are really solely relying on the knowledge and hopefully forthrightness of these individuals that have come back so that we can provide care for them and do our jobs. Importantly, in the long run, these people do worse. Outcomes are much poorer for people who engage in transplant tourism compared to if they got a transplant locally. And some research that I've done recently has shown that when we've looked at factors to try to deter individuals from practicing and engaging in this practice, education seems to be the key issue, particularly educating people around the dangers to them, and potentially more effective than punitive measures, but that is an important issue. Now, in terms of the current status, we do not have accurate numbers in Canada, but it does appear that compared to 10 years ago anyways, the practice has reduced a bit, presumably on the basis of global efforts and in terms of education that we've done on the clinical side, warning people of the risks. Now, I'd like to express in terms of the legislation, first of all, our support for legislation that aims to curb this practice, although there are a few issues that are important in terms of details of this that we'd like to address. Firstly, our overriding priority is to advocate for our patients and their care is within the transplantation and medical community subtracted in a bad way, and have resorted to this terrible act, particularly because when at least in part, this is driven by a reduced access to transplantation in our country. This is accentuated in terms of the bill by the magnitude of the sentence and the fact that the culpability appears to be equally shared between patients and those who are coordinating the practice. And the feeling generally is that it should be weighed heavier on those that are third parties that are coordinating it versus the patients that are partaking. We'd also like to distinguish between the notion of transplant commercialism and organ trafficking. They are both issues that currently are illegal in the Canadian context, but there are discussions in other countries, including the United States, that have been ongoing for many years about a regulated system that would be legislated to allow for transplant commercialism. And so thinking about the future state of that and how this legislation would impact something like that is also worth considering. And lastly, some practical considerations that we're concerned about or that the proposed legislation may deter patients from sharing some of the details that we rely on to know that A, this has occurred, and to B, be able to care for them if they're concerned about their being penalized legally. Lastly, I would just like to humbly advocate for an increased investment on education on this issue in addition to this legislation. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
No translation? Is that, it's okay? Okay. Are you almost done, Dr. Gill? Because you are over 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm okay. I can wrap up now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gill. Could he just repeat the last few words so that we can get the translation? We had problems with translation. So if you could just kindly repeat the last concluding sentences you used in your presentation, we'd be grateful so we don't all have the
Certainly.
benefit of understanding. Yes.
Certainly. I had requested if the importance of education to go along with legislation, as that does appear to be the most effective piece, and making sure people are aware of the legislation, so having a mechanism towards that would be critical. And I had raised concern around concerns that legislation may make it more challenging for us to ascertain that these cases have occurred, as patients may not be as forthright about the details.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gill. Very grateful for that. Now we will go into questions by the members. The first person is MP Jennis. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Jennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for their excellent testimony and to underline the fact that although witnesses certainly had excellent suggestions about more that can be done besides passing this bill, that none of the witnesses raised any problems with the bill as written or suggested that its passage should be delayed. My view, our view has been that we should expedite consideration of this bill, try to move it forward quickly. I support us not doing clause-by-clause consideration so that the bill can be automatically reported to the House and proceed more quickly directly to third reading. We've been working on this for 15 years. It's been too long. I think that's what we owe to we owe to the victims of this horrific practice. In that light, I want to share a notice of motion. That the chair be instructed to schedule an in-public committee business meeting on Wednesday, November 23rd, and that the first order of business during that meeting be the resumption of debate on the motion of Garnet Jennis moved on Monday, November 14th. Now that that notice of motion is out of the way, and I did want to say on a personal note, Dr. Gill, my brother practices at the same hospital as you, so maybe you recognize the name, maybe not, but thank you for your service on the front lines on many important issues. And I wanted to just, there were a number of witnesses who ran out of time in their opening remarks, so I wanted to just invite any witnesses who had additional points that they weren't able to make in their opening remarks to feel free to add those to the record now.
If I may, very briefly, just a point of clarification. I think I did want to reiterate that I think the one area of the legislation where there was some trepidation was around the fact that it appears that there is culpability is equally shared between the patients and those who are coordinating the practice. And the suggestion, certainly from the professional organizations, is that that be shifted such that the primary culpability go towards those that are coordinating the practice, and secondarily for the patient populations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess my one reflection on that is that in many cases the coordination is done by people that would be to a greater extent beyond the reach of Canadian law, whereas this law is primarily aimed at those that are from Canada going abroad to receive the organ. It would seem less likely that someone in Canada would be coordinating the process of organ harvesting, although not impossible. I'm sorry, I don't have the names in front of me, ma'am, but I think our first witness had some comments in her opening statement that were Dr. Cohen. Yeah, did you want to finish your opening statement, or because I think maybe you ran out of time?
Mr. Chair, I would add then to my initial comments the need to tackle organ trafficking specifically, and the criminalization of trafficking in organ, which is a different crime than the trafficking in person for the purpose of harvesting, removing their organs, which is already criminalized in the criminal code. So this proposed legislation disconnects organ trafficking from human trafficking and making it a separate offense, and it also focuses on consent and informed consent, which addresses the situation of children who are victims of forcible organ removal. Bill S-223 seems to apply solely to organs from just the textual reading of it, excluding tissues and cells. So these would be my main points that I did not address in my opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now go to Ms. Bendayan. You have 4 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And let me begin by saying the extent to which I'm proud today. Every time we can welcome experts from the University of Montreal, an institution that I represent with much modesty in Outremont. I also wanted to point out that I've already had the pleasure to work with a colleague of Professor Cohen's, and I'm sure there's no objection to asking a question of Professor Cohen.
Pour laquelle je soulève, est-ce qu'il y a objection, Monsieur Bergeron? Merci. Alors, Dr. Cohen, thank you again for being here. You touched on a number of issues in your introduction, including international conventions, but I also understand from the Senator's presentation just a few moments ago that other countries have strengthened domestic legislation in order to combat organ trafficking. And I was wondering if you can enlighten us on best practices that you've seen around the world and how the bill before us perhaps compares to what our allies are doing.
Mr. Chair, so I would like to start by mentioning I did not conduct a thorough, exhaustive study of all countries, but there is a tendency, especially with the convention that I mentioned, the Council of Europe Convention Against Trafficking in Human Organs, to dissociate human trafficking for the removal of organs from the actual trafficking of human organs.
But
and some countries are...
Sorry, just to be more specific, I understand the international convention framework, but in terms, and it's fine if you don't have that at the tip of your tongue, but in terms of domestic legislation, is there anything that you would like to point the committee to in terms of what other countries are doing domestically?
So there is no specific legislation that I would refer you to, other than what I have mentioned internationally. With the countries that have, just perhaps one additional point, which with the countries that have ratified the Council of Europe Convention, then there is generally the obligation to enact legislation that would make the convention applicable internally. So there is this tendency of criminalizing or suppressing the practice of organ transplant.
Which would be implementing legislation of an international convention. Would Canada, in fact, become a leader then in proposing to do this as S-223 does?
Mr. Chair, in my view, yes. As I mentioned, I think there is a tendency to tackle organ trafficking specifically in domestic legislation. And with this bill, Canada would be at the forefront of dealing with this horrific practice, and also specifically with the extraterritorial nature of the bill, it would be able to tackle in a global concern and not only specifically territorially.
Thank you, and I do believe that that is a very good thing. Can you perhaps elaborate on some of the mechanisms that are in place in S223 to track and monitor? I apologize, Dr. Cohen. It is a complex question of which you will not be able to respond in 10 seconds. So I thank you again for your testimony and for appearing before our committee. A pleasure to see you again.
Thank you, MP Bendayan. We now go to MP Bergeron, please. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Bergeron.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to take over and ask my questions of Professor Cohen. I was very pleased to hear one of our witnesses address us in the language of Molière. It doesn't happen very often at this committee. And I believe that by asking you questions in the French language, we'll hear you answer in the language of Molière. So Bill S223 stipulates that anybody who obtains an organ for or participates in the traffic of organ or know that the transplant is being done without knowing who the organ has been from or is not concerned about the consent has been given. In other words, in what way can we establish that someone knows that the harvesting of an organ has been given without the consent of the donor? Mr. Chair, thank you very much for that question, and thanks for the invitation to speak in French. Here, what we have are different levels of knowledge as to whether we know that consent has been given. So there is the notion of intent that you also see in other legislation and the criminal code. So there's an assessment that needs to be made whether there was knowledge of consent, and that is evidence that can be given through testimony or through written evidence. And I imagine that that will depend on the given situations, but it's not necessarily this notion of intent that is unique to the Canadian Criminal Code. I understand that we could, with this provision, find ourselves with a number of difficulties in terms of burden of proof. There are a number of states that have legislated upstream to make sure that things have been done ethically. Taiwan, for instance, there's an obligation that a patient who gets a transplant abroad must provide in writing certain information about the transplant received to be able to get any treatment post-transplant when they're back in Taiwan. Would this kind of practice simplify things? I mean, rather than be dealing with this downstream, rather to be able to address things upstream and make sure things have been done ethically. Mr. Chair, what is being proposed might well be one way to do things, that is upstream, but I think there are other ways to demonstrate that there has been knowledge that this transplant or harvesting of the organ have not been done with consent. So it's the notion of knowing, and what is being proposed in the bill. There is no other proposal or no other provisions and that would help. So it would be a question of evidence for each case. Given what Taiwan does, do you think that it would be a good idea to envisage an amendment along these lines? Legally speaking, it could help in terms of the burden of proof. But if there's were to add complications or logistical complexities, I would not be able to say. But certainly if there is a possibility upstream to know whether or not an individual had had knowledge of a lack of consent, that could help with the burden of proof.
We now go to MP McPherson. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. I also wanted to just take a moment to thank you all for coming on Monday as well and acknowledge that the committee did not hear your testimony there. The work that you do is vitally important. Dr. Gill, I know that you are in fact a surgeon, and for us to have wasted your time that way is inexcusable. So I want to apologize on behalf of myself and many of my colleagues, I'm sure. To start with, Dr. Gill, I wanted to ask you a few questions. And I do understand what you were saying earlier about wanting to see that culpability be apportioned more fairly, I guess. Because I think what we recognize here is that people that are looking for a organ are in fact very often desperate, and there should be some of that there. But you did talk about the idea that education is a key, that educational activities were a key. What would that look like? How could Canada, the government of Canada, how could the provinces, how could we engage with Canadians on education activities that would make it would help reach that goal of having Canadians be more aware of what organ harvesting, the impacts of organ harvesting?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair, if I may. I think we practice a lot of that on the patient-to-patient level currently. I know at our center, we've got posters, we've got, big signs that have come from the Declaration of Municipal Custodian Group that essentially stamp out organ trafficking. We make that part of our standard counseling of patients when they're going through their transplant process to very overtly mention that and state that this is an unacceptable practice and outline the reasons why. So that's how we do it in the front lines. If you took a public-based approach to, as was outlined earlier, to combat what the current media perception is, I think there are opportunities certainly to highlight the issues and why this is not only bad from all perspectives from an ethical standpoint, but I think the piece that's resonated in my experience with patients is when you tell them, this is not good for you. When I tell my patients that if you're going to buy a television, you're going to buy it from a reputable place. This is a big deal. And if you're going to go somewhere where there's no standards, you will have bad outcomes because this is an illicit practice and that will give you bad outcomes. That does seem to be very effective at deterring people who are considering this practice.
And I wonder then if a national strategy or provincial strategies, because while I'm sure that the work that you do to inform your patients of the impacts on their outcomes, it would probably be more appropriate to have this be a national strategy that was implemented across the country, so we could ensure that every clinic, every clinician was providing the same information. Is that accurate?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. The other thing that you talked a little bit about was the idea that there is a risk of legislation like this deterring patients coming forward. I wonder if you could talk about any strategies that we could employ to prevent that from happening. Any ways that we could address that?
I think that's a very difficult question in terms of what the most appropriate strategies to deter that is. I think on the one hand, we do need to increase awareness if legislation is in place so that people are aware of the potential consequences. This is a significant risk that on the clinical side, we may have individuals that are going to have worse outcomes because they won't come forward in a timely fashion for fear of persecution or prosecution. Excuse me. And so I think a lot of the upfront work we'd need to do would be important. That's partly why I am personally in agreement with a structure where there isn't mandated reporting, and because I think that maintains that confidentiality we'd have with patients, and that would allow us to capture it. But you need an alternate mechanism to make sure you're identifying these cases in addition to that.
Thank you very
much. Thank you, MP McPherson. Now we go to the second round of questions. We have 4 spots left. Mr. Jennis, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. this legislation in front of us, it does not have the mandatory reporting provisions that were in an earlier draft, and I think it's really important for us to discuss and consider some of these questions and whether they should be part of a future piece of legislation. But certainly the goal with this bill is to pass the parts that everybody agrees, and then we can sort of see and explore what maybe should or should not be added. And I think we've got great feedback today that we may even want to do independently of this legislation, provide a report or study further other ways to combat this issue. But Dr. Gill, because it's sort of related to the broader issue, I did want to probe the question of mandatory reporting a bit. Right now, there are certain situations where mandatory reporting is required. Gunshot wounds is the most obvious example, but I think it would apply to sexual abuse as well. I wonder if you can kind of speak to the dynamics around that mandatory reporting currently in those cases, and what we can learn from those situations that might or might not be applicable to mandatory reporting in this case.
Thank you. I think I should start by saying I'm certainly not an expert in the field of mandatory reporting and the logistics of it. I think in general, the current mandatory reporting is typically in a scenario where we are trying to prevent harm. So the instance in which you're concerned that an individual is going to cause harm to someone, that is the most classic scenario in which we would be obliged to breach confidentiality in those instances. And in this instance, the distinguishing feature is that the harm has already been done. And I think that's a bit different than if we know someone's about to embark in the act of transplant tourism, as opposed to somebody who has already done that act. So that would be the primary distinction, Mr. Chair, that I would come up with at this point.
Yeah, interesting. But I suppose in the case of gunshot wounds, that is a case where the harm has been done, right? In the case of ongoing abuse to a person, yes, that's a case where you're preventing harm. But and you could also imagine cases where someone had been shot. Maybe it was context was gang violence, and they didn't want the reporting to be involved, so they were less likely to come forward to the hospital. So there are some risks, I suppose, but on balance, society has decided to have that mandatory reporting in that case. It's an interesting moral question and dilemma, not one tackled by this bill, but I think it's something worth considering. Do any of the other witnesses want to weigh in on the question of possible reporting requirements? If that's a no, that's okay. I'll see the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jennis. We now go to Mr. Sarai. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My question is going to go to Dr. Gill. One thing I just wanted to add, another probably important thing to tell patients who might be contemplating going abroad is the fact that the matches done abroad are probably not as thorough on an organ as they are done here. They can shove anything in you and there's no accountability of it, and that should scare people when they're taking an organ. My question is actually a follow-up to Mr. Genuis in regards to mandatory reporting. What kind of dilemma would a doctor have if he's reporting a patient who's come in with an organ transplant? Because on the other hand, it might impose a problem where people will not report medical complications arising out of a transplant abroad, and therefore they may die. They may not take treatment, fearing they're going to go to jail if they go there. How does a doctor deal with that dilemma?
Thank you. I think that's a very difficult. I think you've articulated the issues very well. That is the primary concern. Is, I think when we're looking after the patients in front of us, our primary priority at that moment is to ensure their well-being, and so anything that's going to compromise my ability to look after my patient is a concern. And so that is the crux of it. And so I think if faced with that dilemma, unless there is a compelling reason to do so, you're going to err on the side of ensuring what's in the best interest of your patient. And that's typically how I think it would unfold. So
then how would you think we would be able to catch perpetrators of this. I mean, really, if they're foreign nationals in a foreign country, we won't be able to get them. The only link to them is usually the Canadian person, which is the patient, unless there's a broker in Canada that is doing it. How do you foresee the enforceability of such a legislation? I'm in favor of the legislation. I'm just trying to figure out how we can enforce this if a doctor is about the only person that's going to know where this organ came from.
I mean, there's. I'll humbly request some or recommend something acknowledging that this is not my area of expertise, but I think that, you know, there are mechanisms that you could justify from a public health standpoint to report if someone has been in a medical facility when outside of the country. And that may potentially be an avenue to identify if someone has actually engaged in any sort of medical tourism, whether it's transplant or otherwise. That would be my only consideration. But that's a whole separate ball of wax, obviously, to consider. But that's one possibility.
Cohen, would you be able to elaborate if you know of any jurisdiction or that has done something and how they, with respects to reporting organ transplants and how to enforce the legislation?
Mr. President, at this point, I wouldn't be able to provide any further information on the reporting other than what I've mentioned before and what Dr. Gill has already mentioned.
Thank you.
Am I out?
Yes. Thank you, MP Sarai. We now go to Mr. Bergeron for a minute and a half, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try to be brief. Ms. Cohen raised the matter a few moments ago. Under 279.4, you have the exploitation and traffic of persons, including the transplant of organ tissues, and under 279.2.1 criminalizes the material pecuniary benefit, and if a person has directly or indirectly benefited from this activity. So what act does 223 want to forbid that is not already forbidden under the criminal code?
En fait,
Mr. Chair, Bill 223 creates another criminal act. So it's the criminal act is the traffic of human organs, which should not be a consequence of the trafficking of a person. What is already criminalized is the trafficking of human beings. So that would be my answer. What my study has revealed, and with the international trends underway, and based on reports, these crimes can be separated. And so there is a concern to treat the traffic of human organs such as the same as the traffic of human beings without seeing the distinctions that can exist if you don't actually have the case of human trafficking. So it would be good to go along with the trend of the convention I mentioned, as well as other trends, which is to deal with these two acts as distinct crimes, that of trafficking human beings with the purpose of removing organs. Thank you very much.
We go to Madam McPherson for
Mr.
a
Chair.
minute and a half.
Thank you again for the testimony to our witnesses. Dr. Cohen, I have a quick question for you. I think we all agree that what is in this bill, there's some very good things in this bill. Can you tell me from your perspective what countries have done things better, what could be strengthened, what could be done in subsequent bills? What other things need to be undertaken by the Canadian government legislatively?
Mr. President, one thing that I would say strikes me is what I mentioned very briefly in my opening statement concerning definitions. So what I have done as a study more on the international framework is often there are definitions of what is trafficking, what is understood by trafficking of organs. And I mentioned, for example, it seems from a textual reading that it does not include, and again, I'm not an expert I'm not a physician, but it does not seem to include tissues or cells because it says obtains an organ. So that could be something to be clarified. Additionally, also forms of participation that carries out, participates in, or facilitates the removal in 240.1, paragraph 1b. It mentions participation. Does participation also, is participation included in the other lineas as well? So essentially, that's these are the two key aspects that I have noticed that other pieces of either international instruments include, which go to the question of clarification of definition.
Thank you very much.
So on that note, given that we are out of time, allow me to thank our three witnesses. Dr. Cohen, Dr. McKay, Dr. Gill, we are very, very grateful for your expertise and for your time. And again, our apologies for some of the challenges we had a couple of days ago. But we certainly understand this complex issue a whole lot better thanks to all the guidance you have provided us today. This meeting now stands adjourned. Thank you.